Hi, I am Brooke, and I'm one of the directors of sales at Drift. I am a self-proclaimed sales geek, so it is actually a real pleasure for me to talk about this stuff. I could do it all day. I do it like at dinner tables when I'm out with people, which is why most of the people I've stayed friends with are either in sales or very close to sales. So this is exciting today to team up with Gong. And we also brought another special guest who I'll introduce in 1 second as well to help us cover the topics today. But today's webinar, we're going to cover three main things. Number one, why visibility both into your deals and into your reps? Why is this such a crucial part of closing our sales? Then number two, how to take the right next step. And this is all about leveraging buyer signals to achieve success and figuring out what your formula is for every single one of your sales processes. And then third is the practical ways that we can train our teams effectively in this largely digital first world. So we're going to cover all that today. As I mentioned, we scored two guests. I'm going to make the first intro to Kevin Kotecki. He's the head of mid-market sales at Gong and runs the mid-market segment, spending a lot of time thinking about and working on the topics that we're covering today. So Kevin, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself real quickly, and then I've got a few questions for you to warm you up for the group.
Yeah, very pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right, so we've got three questions for you today. The first is, how did you get into sales? Of all the careers that you could have had, why did you pick this one? Thinking back.
Yeah, so I was one of those folks who didn't intentionally get into sales right out of college. And so I focused on microfinance and went and did that for a couple years, and mostly actually in sub-Saharan Africa. But I got to work with a lot of small and medium business owners, and their biggest challenge was revenue. And so coming back to the US and back to Seattle where I live, I very intentionally got into the tech space and had that passion for kind of solving business problems and that understanding of how critical revenue was. And so, of course, the natural next fit was being an SDR, like many of folks probably on this call or who will listen to it. And so that was my journey into sales.
Love it. I always love when sales leaders started off as SDRs, the hardest job in sales, in my opinion. And I think you learn a lot of really good fundamentals as an SDR. Also love your non-traditional background and how you kind of weaved your way into it. Cool. Okay, so the second question for you is, do you have someone that you really admire in the sales space, and who is it?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great folks over the years. And so there's a lot of people I do admire and have had many good mentors. I think the two I'll focus on, though, are really broadly accessible to everybody who's listening. And that's actually two sales trainers that I've really learned to admire, especially for their focus on simplicity. And so my first sales trainer was Skip Miller. And he had this mantra that customers solve problems, right? That was the foundation for everything. So they either have a problem or they don't. Either that problem is painful enough to solve or it's not. And then I also really appreciate Josh Braun, who posts quite a bit on LinkedIn and is, he has a lot of good content there. And especially appreciate him, again, bringing it back to the basics, that it's about risk and pain and problems that motivate action. And without that, nothing's going to change. So, simplicity is key. And I think those folks do a good job anchoring on that.
Great ones. And my last question for you, top 3 sales skills that you think are going to be essential for salespeople this year?
Yeah. So I'm answering as skills, not traits, just to be clear. And so as a skill, I think the ability to do research and understand what your customer does, how they make revenue, what business challenges they have or are likely to have, and incorporating that into the second, which is discovery. That's a skill that is constantly in need of work and improvement and practice. And so kind of, again, curiosity and research and incorporating that into discovery. And then the third would be just organization and documentation, kind of some basic project management skills to really bring together the evaluation, the buying process, and really lead that with your customer.
Yeah, totally agree with you on all of those, especially the organization. Deals are getting more and more complex regardless of what segment you're working in. And if you're not organized, it's really, really hard to keep up with all the steps and to be, to the point of this webinar, one step or two steps ahead. I think, like, going back to that question I asked you about who you admire in the sales space, one person that I've followed forever and continue to is Jason Lemkin. I don't know if others on this webinar are big fans of his too, but one of the things that I'm always blown away about year after year is how much content he pumps out. Like, he just puts so much out there. He's always learning and then teaching it back. And I'm such a fan of people who take the time to not just learn and execute, but then also share it so that we can all get better. So I'm a big fan of his. All right, so let's move on to introducing Kyle Bastian. Kyle is the Director of Business Value at Drift. He's one of my favorite and most talented Drift colleagues, and he's going to share some of his wisdom on experimentation and sales play frameworks that he's been running here at Drift. Kyle works with both customers and sellers to understand how they're successful with Drift, and then he enables our sellers to tell that story even better in the pre-sales process. And he's chairing a working group that I've actually gotten to be a part of, and it's been so much fun and so rewarding to be part of it. It's called Sales Lab. And this group gets together once a week to prioritize opportunities, to test, experiment, and then roll those out as standardized sales plays in the field. So in terms of the question I have for you, Kyle, and we'll talk a lot more with you in a few minutes, what do you think the biggest opportunity for sales teams is in this very digital first environment? What would you focus on as a sales manager?
Oh man, so thank you, Brooke, for the intro, and Kevin, great to be on with Gong again. I love working with you guys, and huge Gong super fan. So this is really exciting. Man, Brooke, I was worried you're going to ask me the same questions you were going to ask Kevin, and I was going to have to like make up answers because Kevin's were so good, and I didn't want to just repeat them back to everybody. But so what do I think about the most important opportunity for sales reps? I think I'm going to say something that you're going to roll your eyes, and then I'm going to explain. Hope I can bring you back. But I honestly think it is like aligning with marketing, and that's like a mama and apple pie answer. But I think the more people buy digitally, the more that leaves a digital paper trail. Mm-hmm. And that paper trail, if you can, kind of capture those insights and understand them, and then better yet, act on them in real time with those customers, is the way that I think salespeople fight back to the reality that they are getting less and less time and influence with their buyers in their face-to-face interactions alone. And so I think figuring out a way to, well, like Marketo, right, or tools like that, marketing automation platforms have been around for years to kind of, show that paper trail and what the buyer's journey is. But if you were to show that to a rep, they probably wouldn't know, an instance of a marketing automation platform from, a random software. And so enabling those teams and teaching sales reps how to be digitally relevant, I think, is the biggest opportunity that we have in the profession right now.
Mm-hmm. Lots to be done there. So more to come on that. Okay, so let's dive in to the three topics that we came to cover. The first is around deal visibility and rep visibility. I'm going to start with you, Kevin, and then I'll add some thoughts around how we're looking at it at Drift. But what is your perspective on the importance of having deep visibility into each deal, into what's going on with each rep?
Yeah, the visibility is key, but I think in one particular axis. And I think a lot of times as reps and as sales leaders, we often conflate how much as a breadth with the fact that you're going to win the deal. But back to kind of the basics, I think it's at the heart, you win deals on the basis of some very simple key foundations that make up your recipe. I think for a lot of B2B software sales, for example, that's, do you have pain, right? We talked about customers solve problems, and and combat risk versus nice to haves? Are you engaged at the right power level? And are you, adhering to their buying process and your own evaluation process? And so that power, pain, and process really is your recipe. If you can anchor on that more deeply, that's more correlated to winning than visibility into all the details. And yet that's also more challenging to have visibility into. And so it takes a lot of extra work in most cases to identify that, and to as a sales leader, to spend time working with your team on overcoming those gaps versus just trying to identify again that breadth and potentially poke holes where there might be gaps, but where you're maybe missing that again core winning recipe.
I love your use of the word recipe. It's come up a lot lately. And I think, Kyle, you'll talk a little bit about it in a few minutes in terms of the work that you've been doing, but there really is a way to create and then refine a recipe that works for our reps. And it probably evolves over time. It's not something that's static. We're always sort of adjusting it and changing it with the way that our buyers buy, with the market, with our product evolving. But having frameworks and systems is what allows us to keep, some control over that. And I think, when I look at it from the Drift perspective and a lot of the things that we're working on at the sales management level, when I think about deal visibility and rep visibility, some of the things that have been most helpful, to me as a sales leader over time have been, one, having very, very clear sales stages that everybody is on the same page about. Exactly what every stage in your deal matches up to in terms of what you're doing with that buyer, and then ultimately how you close it and forecast it, but really just to manage the deal. So sales stages. Then two, making sure that reps are regularly recording very clear next steps. And this isn't just for like forecasting and management. It's just as much for the rep to be able to look at their opportunities every day, every week, and figure out what's the one thing that I need to do to move the ball forward on this deal today. And I mean today, and that's what creates that momentum. Third, having very clear exit criteria on every stage. So there can be a lot of ambiguity, I think, on some sales teams where, I feel like it's this stage, it's kind of that stage, I felt good about that call, and it's really hard for reps, and it's even harder for managers and then directors and VPs as you get more and more removed from that, if there isn't very explicit exit criteria that everyone's agreed upon, so that it can be an objective decision if this deal really is in a stage or another. I've got two more. The fourth is win-back plans, and having this collaborative agreement between the seller and the buyer that's documented in a way that we have that clarity around, where things are at with this deal today based on how we talked about starting it and how we all talked about finishing it. And then the last is we lean heavily on Gong, Kevin. We're also in Clary, and between the two of those, we have really good checks and balances systems so that we can figure out the health of our deals, catch red flags, and start to figure out where as managers we have to jump back in and help out and coach and get things on track if we didn't catch it in a deal review or a one-on-one. So that's kind of like the recipe that I was thinking about for visibility, but Gong is such a big part of that. I'm going to move on to our next topic as we're moving through time here. So the second is on taking the right next step in every deal, and having a systematic way to use buyer signals to do this as kind of like a subset of the topic. So I'm going to kick it to you first, Kevin, and then I want to move to Kyle to talk a little bit about what he's been working on. But Kevin, tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think two main things to add here. So I'll keep coming back to that winning recipe, and most importantly, that we need to keep revisiting it and keep testing and requalifying the information that we got from the same folks that we originally sourced that information from, but also from all the additional people that enter into the opportunity over the course of that process. And so that really helps confirm the next step, especially like you mentioned, Brooke, if you are organizing and documenting the process well, and a work back timeline is a very simple a very approachable process that everyone can leverage. Mutual success plans are also popular and something that there are some good examples of out there. Mm-hmm. And so the key there from my perspective is that you share that document with the customer, right? You bring it back to that document and share the qualification and the problems that others have identified in the process, and use that visual construct as a way to show that you're helping walk them through their own process, working back from the implementation date or from the time to value date, as it may be for their use case. And so those two things really help coalesce the next steps and ensure that there's buy-in from the customer.
Yeah. And that buy-in is so important. Like the fact that it's a collaborative document, that the rep didn't create it and put it in front of the prospect. The prospect didn't just hand the rep something, but it was worked on together. And I find that like we iterate on it a lot as we go as well. As things evolve in the buying group or something changes in the evaluation, we have to be agile enough and adaptable enough to make changes to it, and then like make sure that we're both in agreement on the same thing. And my other thought on work back plans is that this isn't just for reps, it's just as much to help the buyer buy in a world where evaluations are kind of heavy, and in a lot of cases not reps, but the buyers are running through multiple evaluations for different solutions that they're buying. Think about how much work and effort that is for our buyers to go through these with big buying groups that they're running point for. So I really think about the work back plan as a service that we provide as a part of the sales process for our buyers when done really well. Before I move on to sales plays, Kyle, I just also wanted to highlight the buyer insight pieces. So one of the biggest things we've been thinking about coming out of last year and into this year, and we've actually launched a whole new set of products to even do better at this, is to provide reps with enough buyer intent signals that reps can understand where buyers are at or prospects are at in their journey from first touch to sign contract. And that's how, our reps at Drift are operating every day, is looking for those signals to see how ready is this prospect? What are they investigating in terms of our content and our website? What kinds of questions are they asking so that our reps can go to them and be more helpful in a world where prospects are looking for almost a self-serve buying journey at this point. So that's kind of what I was thinking about Drift. And I'm going to move it over to Kyle to talk a little bit about the program that he's got in place for sales experimentation, which I think falls really well into this category of the next right step on every deal.
Yeah, and God, love the conversation so far. And Kevin, I love what you said before addressing that. I wanted to comment on something you said, Kevin, around like requalifying information and doing that across various different people as they get brought into the deal. I think that's so important because I find you rarely get the full story from any one person in an evaluation. And I especially love when you get information that needs to be deconflicted. Like two different folks will tell you things that both can't be true. And I find that if you're able to get those groups together and say like, hey, I got to say, I'm hearing this here and I'm hearing this from you, and I'm struggling to make sense of those two things because they can't both be right. So I just want to bring that up and see if I can get a better sense of what I missed there and what's going on. And like those conversations, I think, tend to lead to some of the most fruitful discovery at any part of the process. And often then you get okay, now I get what's going on. You're able to move forward on kind of firm footing, but great call out there. So the way we approach rep enablement and building plays is very like anti-fragile. Like we test our way and iterate into almost everything. And we start, of course, with like the buyer job to be done framework. Like Brooke, you were talking about this, but at each part of the process, the buyer is trying to do something, right? Like maybe learn more around what you solve or how you do it or what the value is going to be or how it's going to be implemented. How do I fire this thing up and when do I start to see results? They're all trying to figure different things out. And there's a bunch of different ways that you could theoretically address that. What Brooke and I have been doing in Sales Lab is just taking a candid look at where are we answering those questions well for our buyers, and where do we not seem to be providing like great experiences around those questions, right? And like the best sales motions are like live in the land of nod. Like you're on a Zoom call and you're talking about stuff and everyone on the call starts like, oh, right, like nodding. It's like star that moment, right, in the Gong call, like write that down. And if you can kind of build a conversation that is a string of the customer going, thank you, I understand it better, you know, then you're probably on to a sales experience that you're going to want to be part of your process. And so what we do in the sales lab is we basically look at where can we be better. We come up with a theory of how we might better address those conversations with our customers. And then we experiment. And we do this with no real executive sponsorship. Like this is something that, you know, the sales leaders, our solutions consultants, product marketing, myself, we all just kind of decided to do it and build this experimental framework that now we can try something small, a handful of reps, see if you can teach other reps once it starts working. And only then do we actually put it through kind of our formal enablement infrastructure where, you know, you would like certify reps how to do something and codify it as part of your sales process. And so we really kind of abhor the big reveal at Drift of like, hey, this is the new thing, you know, that we want everyone doing. And we instead try to get in front of that by, you know, a month or so and just test our way into it. And it's been pretty cool. Like, I don't know, I mean, Brooke, you're like, you know, one of our day ones on this team. And it's kind of it's been fun to just take like a purely experimental approach to some of this stuff. And I think it's scrappy, but I think it gets you to the right customer experience fast. No, it's a fun way to approach it, but I don't know. What do you think, Brooke? You've been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite things that we work on. And I think really high value, it's just quietly high value, you know, because it takes some time to cook. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is that it allows companies that are decidedly not startups anymore, you know, like we're scale ups, we're growing, we're big companies now. And a lot of companies start to lose their ability to innovate, especially at the sales level around that point. Like they kind of get all jammed up in the process that's in place and it's too hard to change it because it becomes like moving an aircraft carrier instead of like a small boat. And I think that this framework, you know, that Kyle has led in building out gives us a chance to innovate in a really light lift way where we're not committing a ton of resources to anything until we've tested it out at a small scale in the field. You know, we have some hypothesis behind it around like, these are some of the challenges that we're running into on the sales floor and, you know, that are challenges for our buyers. So these are the things that we're going to pick to work on. And then we've executed on a couple so far this year that, you know, I think I and a bunch of salespeople are feeling really good about. So wanted to talk through that framework. Hope that's helpful to some people that are listening to this. And, you know, we can post some more thoughts on that after the webinar as well.
Well, and I'll give a huge shout out to Kevin, to your team at Gong. I mean, this is like y'all have been doing this for years with Gong Labs. And I remember like I first heard of Gong when I saw, I think, Chris Orlov's like second Gong Lab article ever, like 2017. And I just like cold reached out to him like, dude, how are you doing this? Like, this is magic. You know, like I want this approach. And that's very much what you're doing. It's like, hey, like there's a million sales theories out there. Like there's a book, a process, like there are a dime a dozen these days. But, you know, the way you've taken like a data-driven approach to like, hey, you know, after this many questions, people start to lose interest. Like, you know, you've quantified things like just like question fatigue, you know, and when the right time to talk about prices and all these kind of cool things that I think is very much aligned with how we think about things at Drift of, you know, using data, using experiments, you know, finding the thing that works for the customers based on how they, you know, vote with their wallets. Really cool stuff.
Some of my heaviest content consumption comes from Gong for as long as I can remember. So I really appreciate all of the research work that you're all doing. I'm going to drop one question from the chat in before we move on to our third and last topic. So we have the question, what are the key metrics that you look at to improve sales visibility? Kevin, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think going back to the foundational elements, it maybe doesn't jump out as a metric per se, but to most folks. But actually, when you quantifying the pain, right, and focusing on the pain, and having a conversation where you can identify with the customer in a way that they believe in, what the outcome will be if they can address that pain, if they can close that risk gap. And the more you can anchor on that, the more the conversation becomes about, transforming the business and less about, buying a tool.
Yep, agree. And I think when I think about key metrics to improve sales visibility, these metrics I kind of carry across everything that we do. And they're just funnel conversion metrics to start. It sounds very, very basic, but it works like a charm, is to understand of all of the leads that we're working collectively across AEs, SDRs, inbound, outbound, whatever we're doing. Of those, how many are we converting into meetings? Of the meetings, how many are we converting into opportunities? Of opportunities, how many of those are going to pipeline? Of pipeline, what's going to close? Watch our sales cycle, watch our deal size. So that's it. Those are the key metrics. And if you watch those over months, quarters, and then annually, and then you break it down by team and by rep, you start to get very clear indicators of what's going well and what's not going well across your sales process. And I think, it's insights like that I can always fall back on. And then that's the type of thing I can come back to Kyle with and say, hey, like, we're starting to see this change. We're starting to drop one of our conversion rates where we were normally strong, or our deal cycle is starting to extend significantly. How can we look at this inside Sales Lab and create a little bit of an experiment to adjust it? So those are the metrics that I think about. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kyle. And then there's one more question here for you too in the chat.
No, I mean, like, I honestly do think Gong is one of the key ways to improve sales visibility. Just something as easy as like momentum in a deal. And, sometimes you'll see deals that are forecasted for a near term close date, and, look at the timeline in Gong and you're not seeing a ton of customer activity, and you're actually seeing like a couple emails from your rep that went unanswered in the last couple of weeks. And, I almost don't even go any further. I'm like, okay, that's not closing by the end of the month. Like, there's no momentum on that. And, that's an easy visual way to get visibility into what's happening, to give some love there. But that's what I use, honestly.
And the reps use it too. I love that it's a great management tool. It's even better that you can't rip it out of the hands of our reps, because they use it to manage their business as well. Like, that's the sign of a great product. So I'd say that both the reps and the managers are using that to check their deal health. Before we move on to the last topic, Kyle, what prompted you to start the Sales Lab at Drift?
So I had this idea like 5 years ago, and I tried to get my company to let me hire for it, and it was like a hard no. And so I realized that people actually want to do this, within your company already, and they will do it, and you don't need to hire for it. But it was pointed out to me once that every product, everything you think of as being innovative becomes a commodity over a long enough time frame. And many people have caught lightning in a bottle and done something really innovative once, and then didn't move on or continue to innovate, and got caught and got surpassed by other folks and other technologies. And so I just applied that thinking to how you approach and show up for customers and sales. And I think the lesson there is, like, you can't just have something that works right now. Like, you have to have a process for innovation, like a standard way that you create and stay current with what your customers are needing. And I think anybody that's sold over the last 5 years, and the last 2 particularly, will agree that, what buyers expect from companies has changed a lot. The way they consume information has changed a lot. The way that you need to show up to be relevant has changed a lot. And so we can't be right today. We have to always make sure that we are have a process for continuing to be right going forward. And so that's what made me think like, all right, what would that look like? Like, what would an ongoing innovation engine within your sales organization look like? And that's what we attempted to form with Sales Lab.
Awesome. All right. Third and last topic, and this is around training our teams remotely, which, we call them conversation spaces at Drift. There are offices in a number of cities internationally. We've got one here in Boston. I'm only in the office like 2 days a month at best. And I go in for some meetings, but largely our team is operating remotely. And that's true for a lot of companies right now. And that's completely changed the way that we need to onboard and train our teams. And it's not going to go back. Like, this is the new reality. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about how we're all handling that. I'll start with just sharing a little bit before I kick it to Kevin. But, for us, there's just a tremendous amount of work going on across our sales leadership team, our ops team, Kyle's Sales Lab team, enablement, product marketing. All of these groups are collaborating to better enable our reps to onboard well in this rapidly changing environment, because the way buyers buy is changing fast. Our products are changing fast. The rate of innovation in software is just faster than ever. And we need to make it easy for our reps to keep up with that in a consumable way. So, that's a huge for us, and it's very cross-functional. Sorry about the feedback. I know there's some feedback on this. I'm going to switch over to Kevin, though. I know this has been a giant focus for you at Gong, and something that Gong solves for too. So tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll start with just a little background story briefly. But prior to joining Gong, worked at a couple early stage companies where we were small enough and there were few enough conversations that basically everybody could be all hands on deck, right? So you could compress the learnings around what's working across all the various departments: engineering, product, marketing, sales, and just iterate really rapidly. And so even an environment that's not digital first, or where folks are in the office, for example, as you scale up, Brooke, to go back to that analogy, it becomes more and more challenging to compress those learnings. And there are more competing voices and competing initiatives taking place. And so I think the first thing to start with is just to continuously endeavor to bring things back to that voice of the customer. To have that be the reality that you build your winning recipe on, not just from a sales perspective, but also in how you're building the product and how you are putting together your messaging. And so with machine learning and with the new technologies available to us, you can meaningfully compress that down in a way that used to require a lot of in-person, a lot of manual processes, and a lot of iteration. And so I think that's really the key: is what is working for customers, what are they consistently doing and saying in the process that is leading them to solve their problems with your product as part of that solution, and then what are the best reps doing that we can replicate. And I think that to me, the thing to anchor on when you're talking about training your team, and the point to which you want to get them, is this point where they can start detaching from the outcome a little bit more, right? Mm-hmm. Sales is a challenging role. It's a challenging career path that can be very stressful. But the more you anchor on that winning recipe, the more you identify it and keep coming back to it, the more confident you can be as a rep and as a leader that you have done the right steps. And that if it doesn't result in the outcome that you wanted, it's probably because it was not meant to be, or because the alignment wasn't there, or the pain wasn't as visceral as it needed to be. And so to me, that's the core of training, is getting to the point where you can detach from the outcome, have better work-life balance, and be confident that you adhere to the right process.
Yeah. And you're so right that like reps do need to lean into that trust the process notion that I think we've probably all been saying for a long time, but now more true than ever, that you follow the right steps for the right reasons and you do it on a consistent basis, you're going to get pretty consistent results. And when you fall off track, you're going to always have that line of sight into why you fell off track, because you have that organized, well-defined process in place. so you know what actually happened. Otherwise, you're just guessing. So I know that's huge for a lot of teams. I'm just checking the chat one more time as we start to conclude. There are a few questions in here I'm going to read through. One from Eric, it says, this would require full buy-in from all areas in the company. The groups outside of sales need to trust the process as well. Internal top to bottom agreement on the process is key to the success, I would think. So less of a question, more of a comment. Totally agree with you, Eric. It is company-wide, you know, and I think all of us on this call right now presenting this webinar are very fortunate to work for companies where sales and marketing are heavily aligned. We are sales organizations where, you know, the entire business sort of rallies around the sales team, because that alignment is so important, and not to have sales in a silo. I wonder how many folks are experiencing that.
Well, I think it's also important to note that you know, the other parts of the business do want to have that level of insight and understanding, and in most organizations, and certainly historically, there are a lot of filters to that information that didn't necessarily engender trust, right? And a common experience, if you've been in the software space for a while, is sales or sales engineering goes to product and says, we need this product. If we only have this feature, or this thing is produced, then we can win deals. And in engineering, you know, is in a mode where they're like, okay, well, what's the trade-off? How do we, you know, there's a whole conversation that happens around that. And the more that you can bring that voice to the customer and make it accessible to those different stakeholders in a way where that has higher credibility, frankly, has higher fidelity to hear that directly from the customer's perspective, you'll actually find a lot. Most teams I've worked with that have gone through that process, they realize, oh, we actually were better aligned than we always thought. There was just less clarity to that. There's less visibility. And so democratizing access to that rather than filtering it all through sales actually helps create better alignment. So I think folks will be pleasantly surprised if they go through that process.
Yeah, totally. Are there any other questions? I'm going to take one more minute to make sure that we don't have other questions from the group that we can answer. All right. You can always get in touch with any of us on LinkedIn. I will drop my LinkedIn into the chat before we wrap up today, and maybe Kevin and Kyle, you can do the same so that folks can get in touch with us if they want to. Always happy to sync up and talk sales, talk shop. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of my favorite things to do. So there's my LinkedIn. Hope you'll connect with me. Would love to know you. And we appreciate that you joined us today.